alive. She died a few years later. She burned to death, you remember? And he married again. But we kind of got away from them. And when they first came here, they stayed with my uncle, I don't know for how long, maybe a week or so, until they got kind of adjusted. But he got a job almost right away.
And the reason they came was because you had relatives, is that right?
The reason they came here is because I say my uncle was here. Originally, they were going to stay in, they were going to the States. But before they left and stuff like that, the tendency was that they come where the family is. Because there were Jews in Hamilton at that time, and where they were going to go to in the States, they didn't know anybody. And my mother was a homebody.
Did they have any problems adjusting to the...
Didn't take him very long, because I say my dad got a job almost right away with his German firm, and he was a master tailor to start off with, so I mean he didn't have to kowtow to anybody. And they stayed at Kamaiki's, I don't know, maybe 6 months, and the tendency was after that his job was a steady job. And they bought a house at 11 George Street, just torn down now. That's where I was born, at 11 George. You see, and we lived there up until the time that we moved in on James Street.
Did your father stay with the same firm?
My father stayed with Bartman's right straight through until he went into business for himself. He and a fellow by the name of Morris Greenwald went into partnership in the Exclusive Ladies Tailoring Company on James Street, 135 James North. That's when he left his job at Bartman's. And when my father came over here, he was so orthodox that one of the agreements he went to work for Bartman is he didn't have to work on Saturdays.
And you didn't work?
He didn't work, as long as he worked for Bartman's, he didn't work on Saturdays.
About what year would he finish at Bartman's? When did he go into business?
Well, now that's kind of a tough thing to say. We moved in on James Street, I must have been about 6 years old. So it must have been about 1915.
1915.
I was born 1909. I figured he was 6 or 7 years old at that time. So it must have been 1915 that he went into partnership with Greenwald.
And he stayed with Greenwald?
He stayed with Greenwald for, I mean, I couldn't tell you how many years, but then they split the business up. And my dad took over the Exclusive Ladies Tailoring, and that's where we stayed. You see, for about, I was by Mitzvah on Gore Street, and we must have been on Gore Street about 2 years. I was 6, so we must have been there we must have been on James Street for about 5 or 6 years. And then we left Gore Street. And at that time, all the Jews lived on James Street. There was Charlie Shapiro, Willie Shapiro, and a family named Montblat, and the man, the jeweler, and Walters was a jeweler. On that, Walters afterwards moved over on Barton Street. And, there was a guy used to run a shoe store, Walker used to run a shoe store across the street, you see, at that particular time. And that was like the little Jewish community around there. York Street was one.
North.
James North, from Vine down to Barton. And there was a Jewish community on James Street at the same time that they used to have that Jewish community up on York Street. You see, but we were segregated from them, because the people up on York Street were the rags peddlers and the second-hand dealers, you know, like, so they used to have second-hand stores. But on James Street, so there was Plisco, he used to have a leather goods store, and there was Kaufman. Then Kaufman had a florist shop, you see, and my man was a tailor, and Mum Black was
there.
Yeah, Schechter was there. No, Schechter wasn't there then. Schechter was up on York Street.
Yes.
Schechter came down James Street later,
Yeah.
you see. And the section up across the road from Meaton's were Finkelsteins and that bunch, and Halpern's, you know, they opened the H&F Silk and Wool and stuff like that. That all came later. We were down on James Street long before that.
Now, tell me, your father was very active in the Jewish community. Is that
In the
right?
Jewish community, he was the one that got together with the Chevra there, and they had a shul. They formed one of the The Hespery Shul, which is
Is your father one of the founders?
one of the founders, and the first minyan they had for Yom Tov, there used to be a theater on King Street West called the Royal Theater, just the other side of McNabb Street. And upstairs over the Royal Theater, there was a hall, and that's where they had their first Yom Tov.
And he was active in that shul all the way through.
All the way through, right up until he passed away.
Is there anything you particularly remember from that, his connection with the shul? Any particular incidents that were interesting?
Well, he was very, very interested. His whole life was the shul. He was the president 2 or 3 times. The shul grew from a house after they left the hall. They bought a house at York and Peter, and it was a house. And then they extended the house, you see, and made they took an extra room at the back for the women's shul. The men's shul was in the front, and then they rebuilt the shul. Don't ask me what year.
That's the Hespery shul.
The Hespery Shul. Yes, I can tell you the Hespery Shul right from the word go, because as I say, originally it was a house, and then it became like a 2-room business. Then they divided it so that they faced it one way, and then they rebuilt it again. They put the beam in the center, and then they rebuilt it to what it is now. And it's been this way for quite a few years. Only there used to be like an upstairs there. They took the upstairs out, and they made it all open in there now.